The harbor slept under a quilt of fog, the kind that blurred sky and sea into one unbroken sheet of gray. You could hear only the lap of water against rusted pilings and the distant cry of gulls that hadn't yet decided if morning was worth the effort. He moved through it like a ghost, an aging veteran with a duffel over one shoulder and a scarred shepherd dog at his heel. The scent of brine and metal followed them down the wharf. Then the mist thinned just enough for shape to emerge, a curved shadow half buried in the silt near the tide line. A hull. A submarine, sealed and silent, its conning tower jutting from sand like the dorsal fin of something prehistoric. On the hatch, a folded note pressed under a corroded compass read, "When the ocean forgets, remind it." The metal beneath his hand hummed faintly, alive. The dog growled once, eyes fixed on the sealed door. His name was Reed Maddox. In another life, he had piloted riverboats for the Navy, steering through dusk and gunfire with only instinct to guide him. Now, he spent his days repairing what time had already given up on. Propellers, old engines, lanterns left behind by tourists who had moved on to better hobbies. His home was a decaying boathouse that leaned into the bay with the stubborn grace of an old man refusing help. The dog, Brann, had been his partner since the last deployment, one that ended with more names buried than saved. They lived quietly. Mornings began with coffee strong enough to bite, and jogs along the coastline until Brann decided the world no longer posed a threat. Evenings were spent with the radio hissing static, soldering tools glowing under a clamp lamp, the soft rhythm of the sea as background hum. That calm fractured one fog-drenched afternoon at the harbor market. Reed was there trading for wire when the old man appeared. He looked out of place, coat salt-stained, eyes bright as if carrying reflections from somewhere impossible. He studied Reed for a long time before speaking. "You still fix things that ought to be left broken?" Reed gave a short, uncertain laugh. "Depends on who's asking." The man set something on the counter, a rusted key attached to a slate tag engraved with marine coordinates. "A favor, then," he said, "for someone who listens to the quiet. Friend, whatever door this belongs to's probably long gone." "The door isn't that kind," the man replied. "When you reach the coordinates, listen before you turn it." Then he tapped the table once, like punctuation, and walked into the crowd. Reed tried to follow, but the old man vanished between the fish stalls as though the mist had reclaimed him. Reed pocketed the key, intending to forget. But that night, the wind outran the lighthouse. Rain strafed the bay in sheets. Somewhere in that chaos came a metallic knock against the shore, steady, rhythmic, too deliberate to be driftwood. Brann lifted his head, ears pinning back. A low growl rolled through his chest as if he knew the pattern. Reed rose, heart pacing faster than his steps. He threw on his jacket, whistled once, and followed the dog through the rain. The tide hissed across rocks as they moved along the waterfront. The sound grew clearer. 3 knocks, pause, then 3 again, the same pulse Brann's tail had once beaten in nervous habit. They crested a rise where the fog thinned to blue steel light. The object loomed below, half swallowed by wet sand. A submarine skeleton neither Navy nor museum could claim. Rain slicked the curved metal, and rivulets ran down its hull as though the sea wept for it. Reed approached slowly, water sloshing around his boots. The nameplate was unreadable, letters eroded down to scars, but the shape of the vessel told him it had once been small, perhaps an experimental deep-sea model. The hatch was sealed shut under layers of corrosion that looked more like rust turned to stone. Brann circled, whining. His tail dropped, and for a brief moment Reed thought he heard something breathing behind the steel. He pressed his ear to the hull. A vibration pulsed once, subtle as a heartbeat, then silence. That's when he remembered the key. He pulled it from his pocket, turned it under the lantern light, and found a faint pattern of circles etched along the handle, ripples spreading from a single point, like what water does when a drop falls into stillness. The key slid neatly into a small recess near the hatch handle, but when Reed tried to turn it, the mechanism refused, locked in its own exhaustion. He stepped back, drenched and winded, staring at the massive cylinder that refused to belong anywhere on Earth. Brann barked twice, sharp and uneasy. Lightning arched across the water and caught the metal in full flash. For an instant, the hull shimmered, not with reflection, but as if light passed through veins hidden within, glinting in blue-white arcs. Then the glow vanished, leaving the world gray again. Reed knelt, fingers trembling more from recognition than fear. Machines didn't hum like that without power, and this thing had been buried for decades. He read the note again, the one still tucked under the compass, barely legible now from water. When the ocean forgets, remind it. In his line of work, forgotten things were usually better left that way. But curiosity, his one surviving vice, tightened its hold. He looked at Brann. The dog's gaze met his, uncertain but loyal, the kind of silent consent forged in years of chaos. "All right, old boy," Reed muttered. "Tomorrow we see what wants remembering." They stood in the wind until the tide began to rise again, swallowing the submarine in slow, dark swells. Reed laid a hand on the hull one last time before turning back toward the boathouse. The hum beneath his palm trembled faintly, as if the thing heard and answered. That faint vibration chased him through the storm all night, echoing inside the walls each time the wind paused, as though the sea itself now kept different time, waiting for his return. The storm eased by morning, leaving thin ribbons of mist hanging over the water. The harbor looked half erased, its outlines melting into gray. Reed stood on the dock, coffee steaming in his palm, watching waves tug at the sand where the submarine had been buried. The tide had drawn back farther than usual, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. Brann paced at the edge of the boathouse ramp, restless. His ears flicked toward the horizon every few seconds. When Reed poured out what was left of his drink, the splash echoed oddly, longer, as though it fell through layers of air that shouldn't exist. That afternoon, the strangeness grew sharper. The radio on the workbench kept breaking into bursts of static when the tide was high, and the small brass compass Reed used for repairs turned slow circles whenever he faced the direction of the wreck. He took it apart twice, thinking the needle jammed. It wasn't. When evening came, he set out with his lantern and the same key that had refused him. Brann trotted beside him through dunes still slick with salt. The fog was thicker tonight, a luminous white that seemed to glow from unseen lamps. When they reached the shore, Reed stopped short. The submarine's hull glimmered faintly beneath the surface, humming at intervals like a sleeping generator. Every few seconds, the sand above it shifted, grains dancing to the rhythm. The sound wasn't metallic exactly, closer to the low resonance of a cello string drawn underwater. Reed crouched, running his fingers over the outer plating. The cold bit through his gloves, but underneath pulsed gentle warmth, just enough to blur the edge between living and dead matter. He tapped it once with a wrench. The echo came back lighter, quicker, as if testing him. "Still out there, huh?" he murmured. Brann whined. He spent the next hours scraping barnacles off the visible sections, brushing away sand, tracing seams that barely looked designed by human hands. The vessel's curvature was wrong, closer to organic shapes, smooth and rib-like. The keyhole, once stubborn, now seemed to breathe faint vapor with each pulse of sound. Back inside the boathouse, Reed unrolled his oldest nautical charts across the table. He traced the coordinates etched onto the key: 51 degrees north, -10 west. Out at sea, east of the harbor's mouth, but there was something odd in the pattern. The key's coordinates fell along a faint circle sketched decades ago, one of Whalers Bay drift routes that hadn't existed since the 50s. He rummaged through crates until he found a small tin of maps from his service years. Near the bottom lay an unfamiliar chart, hand-drawn, too clean to be Navy issue. Each longitude line was marked not with numbers, but with short dashes, Morse fragments, maybe. He followed the first sequence with his finger. Dot, dash, dash, dot. He blinked. It spelled his name. Behind him, the radio hissed again, followed by 3 sharp bursts of static spaced evenly, like the same code repeated. Brann barked once, standing rigid, eyes locked on the receiver. Reed felt the hair at his neck rise. That night, the dreams arrived. No faces, only light flickering through water and a sound pulsing deep behind it. 3 beats, pause, then one rising tone. He woke drenched, the same pattern still ringing in his head. It matched the dog's heartbeat perfectly. For days the humming continued, predictable as a tide. Every dawn and dusk the submarine sent out its pulse. Reed could feel it even miles inland. Nails rattled on shelves, and the water in the kettle quivered before boiling. He repaired nothing those days. He only listened. By the 5th day, curiosity devoured caution. He walked to the pier before sunrise, the world tinted pewter. When he reached the inlet, mist rolled across the water like breath from unseen lungs. The key weighed heavy in his pocket. Brann barked softly, once, twice, then waited. Reed knelt beside him. "We'll wait for night tide," he said, unsure why the words felt rehearsed. He spent the hours sharpening his tools as though prepping for deployment. The boathouse filled with small mechanical noises, oil can squeaks, the scrape of sandpaper, the shifting creak of boards. Between each came faint echoes from outside, carrying through the metal roof like songs stretched too thin to bear language. When moonrise finally cleaved through cloud, the water below shimmered pale green. The hum reached a new pitch, higher now, almost harmonic. He followed it across the rocks until the submarine's tower rose again from the tide, slick and luminous. This time the hatch looked changed. The rust had split into radiant lines, like veins under skin. Reed pressed a hand against it, feeling warmth bloom under his palm. The pattern formed 6 concentric circles, pulsing outward in time with his breathing. Under the hum, he heard something else. Layered tones. Voices, perhaps. Woven through countless echoes of the same plea, too quiet to name. Brann whined low, tail curled under, but he didn't retreat. Reed tilted his head, listening through the hull. The rhythm inside had a shape. The longer he listened, the more he recognized fragments of Morse, frustrated looping sequences, as if whoever sent them kept forgetting the end of their own message. He turned the key once more. This time it moved a fraction, not enough to open, but enough to release a sigh of trapped air, warm and salt-sweet, the scent of some far lifespan sealed in iron. The pulse quickened instantly. Reed staggered back as the sand trembled beneath him. Then it stopped, suddenly, almost relieved. The lighthouse on the bluff flickered once and went dark for 5 full seconds before recovering. Back in the boathouse, he sat by the window long after midnight, staring at the faint glow where sea met sky. Electricity still trembled through the floorboards. Brann lay beside him, refusing to sleep, ears twitching in time with each distant rumble. At dawn, Reed checked his battery shed. Every needle on his voltmeter was red, though none of his systems drew power overnight. He unplugged every cable, reset the fuses, replaced the batteries. Still, the current bled inward, not out. Whatever force pulsed from that metal carcass now fed itself through the harbor's wiring like it owned the line. He picked up his logbook, the one from service. Each letter on the last page had faded almost invisible except for a scrawled note from years ago. Stay close to rhythm. It keeps the living from falling apart. He rubbed a thumb over it slowly. By the next twilight, the dog began growling at nothing again, ears toward the direction of the surf. Reed followed his gaze and realized the entire tide line traced a shallow arc of light, faint and steady, matching the hum's pulse. Beneath it, something vast stirred, a blooming of phosphorescence no weather could explain. He understood what the old man's words meant then. When the ocean forgets, remind it. The sea had forgotten how to listen, and whatever slept inside that submarine was trying to teach it again. Reed shed his gloves, let the damp wind bite into his hands, and whispered, "Tomorrow night. Full tide." Brann pressed close, trembling but obedient. There was fear, yes, but also an unfamiliar pull, like recognizing a song half remembered from youth. The vessel wasn't calling them the way danger calls curiosity. It felt more like grief calling home. He turned down the lamp, left the radio unplugged to stop its restless static, and sat on the steps overlooking the water until dawn burned through fog. The hum persisted beneath everything, soft, patient, like the ocean holding its breath before remembering how to speak. The tide drew back under an eerie stillness. Not a whisper of wind, not the usual cry of gulls, just the hush that comes before something chooses to happen. Reed stood at the waterline, lantern unlit in his hand, the sky above him a dim vault of silver cloud that turned the sea into dull glass. The dog waited beside him, fur slick with salt. Each breath the animal took came out as mist that lingered in the dead air. The key was warm against Reed's palm. Not hot, but alive, humming the way a living thing breathes in sleep. When he knelt beside the hatch, the metal no longer felt rough. The rust had peeled away in delicate patterns, leaving arcs that shimmered like fish scales in the diffuse light. Brann let out a low whine, half warning, half surrender. Reed inserted the key. For a breath, nothing moved. Then, with slow resistance, it turned. The motion vibrated through his bones, a deep pulse that made the air quiver. The lock released with a noise like a sigh carried from the bottom of the ocean. Beneath it followed a whisper, short, melodic, impossibly human. The hatch lifted. Warm air rolled out, brushing Reed's face with the scent of old copper and something faintly medicinal. "Easy," he told the dog, though his own voice wasn't steady. Brann hesitated at the threshold, then stepped beside him, the way he had once done when searching flooded tunnels after storms overseas. Reed climbed down the narrow ladder until his boots met dry metal. His lantern flickered, though he hadn't unshuttered it. The glow came from within the submarine itself, soft green, bioluminescent threads winding along the seams like veins under translucent skim. The air didn't taste stale. It smelled faintly of rain and ozone, as if the vessel had stolen a breath from the surface right before sealing itself away. He swept the light along the corridor. The walls were pristine. Too pristine for something buried decades under sand. Every rivet gleamed. Moisture beaded and then drew inward as though absorbed by the metal. The floor plates issued faint chimes as he walked, sound bending like pressure underwater. Brann padded behind him, nails clicking in gentle counterpoint. It wasn't just machinery down there. The bulkheads curved with organic symmetry, neither wholly engineered nor accidental. Embedded windows showed dark voids beyond, tanks or chambers. The glass pulsed faint reflections of movement, thin tendrils of light twisting against the gloom. Farther in, the main control room stretched wider than expected. Desks, gauges, and panels stood in perfect alignment, untouched by age. The controls emitted a low murmur, electricity without source, screens faintly shimmering with unreadable script. Reed rested his hand near one dial. The surface softened under his fingers, responding like skin warmed by contact. "Who built you?" he whispered. Brann's ears flattened. The dog looked toward a sealed side compartment whose metal door trembled as if something within had shifted. The sound was slow and rhythmic, a deep intake, then release. Reed approached and wiped dust from the small window. His heart clutched hard in his chest. Behind the glass, a figure floated upright, face serene, uniform intact, enclosed in a narrow pod filled with luminous fluid. Frozen, but not dead-looking, as though waiting for an order to wake. He stepped back. The chamber beyond held more of them, 12, maybe 15. Figures in identical pods, stretching along both walls. Some wore naval insignias, some bore none at all. Their hands folded on their chests. Faint strings of light ran through the fluid, pulsing slower than a heart rate, but steady all the same. "What is this place?" Reed breathed. His voice sounded small in the heavy air. The dog pressed closer, hackles half raised. From the far end of the room came a steady dripping. He turned and followed it past a bank of flickering screens until he reached the reactor corridor. There the architecture changed. Pipes bent like ribs, and each pulse of energy sent a shimmer of blue rising across their surfaces. The hum that had haunted the bay was louder here, layered into chords that vibrated through his spine. Halfway down the corridor, carved into the inner wall, he found words faintly illuminated by the same blue light. Letters inlaid with copper read, "Heat is memory. Sound keeps it alive." He traced the inscription with a gloved fingertip. The phrase felt familiar, as if drawn from a half-forgotten story. Brann tilted his head, eyes following the motion of Reed's hand. The hum behind the metal answered in cadence, 3 slow pulses, pause, then 3 again. Reed realized the rhythm matched the knock that had drawn them here nights ago. A code repeating, or maybe breathing. He took a slow, deliberate breath, and under it, another answered. Deeper in, the submarine opened into a chamber that looked impossibly out of proportion to the vessel's size. The ceiling expanded beyond where the hull should end, forming a circular chamber bathed in faint phosphorescence. Pools of light shimmered on the floor in moving patterns. Reed walked to the edge of one reflection and froze. The pool wasn't water, but condensed air, thick enough to ripple under sound. When he spoke, the surface quivered, replicating his syllables in metallic echoes. "I'm listening," he said quietly, unsure whom he was addressing. The chamber answered with a low harmonic note that carried through every wall, unlocking a cascade of tones. Lights across panels flashed to life, greens fading to amber, amber to deep red, before settling into a pattern that reminded him of sonar sweeps. The floor beneath him vibrated gently, not push or pull, but invitation. Brann barked once, the sound sharp. It echoed back multiplied, each bark stretched into drawn-out chords. The dog whimpered, backed against Reed's leg. Reed could feel through his boots the rhythm aligning again. Heartbeat pace, slow and steady. The vessel beat like something alive. He approached the forward console and rested both hands on it. Lines of faint writing rose across its glass surface. Names, dates, geographic coordinates, all dissolving before he could read them. Between flashes came a blurred image that looked like an atom, or perhaps a spiral galaxy, then collapsed into numbers pulsing with the phrase, Lyra 01. The name struck something in him, though he couldn't recall why. He looked toward one of the pods. The nearest figure's nameplate bore the same word. Lyra Crew Unit A. A thud echoed through the hull. Not from outside, but somewhere deeper beneath their feet. It was followed by a long exhale through ventilation shafts, carrying a warmth that filled the chamber like breath. The air shimmered. Something beyond the last bulkhead rattled. Reed raised his lantern instinctively, even though light no longer seemed to matter down here. From a dark passage ahead came the unmistakable rhythm of footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing without a source. Brann crouched low, silent now, eyes fixed on the darkness. Reed gripped the key until its edges bit his palm. He could swear the sound formed syllables between beats, not words exactly, but impressions of speech, pleading, grateful, lost. The same tone that had whispered through the hatch now surrounded them. He chose not to run. Whatever was here had waited too long for silence to break. He stepped forward into the shadow, voice steady. "I hear you." The corridor brightened at once, walls rippling as though light itself was liquid. For a heartbeat, he saw faint shapes pass through the glow. Faces from photographs, the kind found in ship logs decades old. They looked young, hopeful, and terribly tired. Then everything stilled. The air cooled again, leaving only faint vibration like breath drawn in and held. Reed exhaled. The key in his hand dimmed to quiet warmth. He turned toward Brann, who pressed his shoulder against Reed's knee, trembling but unbroken. "We'll find who you were," Reed murmured. The hum answered in soft harmony, less command now than promise. As they made their way back toward the ladder, Reed glanced once more at the inscription on the wall. "Heat is memory. Sound keeps it alive." He understood only part of it, yet the words clung to him, echoing in each step he took toward the surface. Above them, the sea remained still, as though listening, waiting for the next breath to begin. The following morning dawned without color. A gray so complete, it seemed the world had been sketched in pencil and left unfinished. Reed sat on the dock with Brann beside him, both staring toward the stretch of water where the submarine rested unseen beneath low tide. The hum had faded overnight, yet its absence was louder than the sound itself. He could still feel it inside his chest, a phantom vibration beating between heart and sternum. When the radio flickered to life, he nearly dropped his coffee. The frequency dial spun by itself through static before settling on a deep, intermittent buzz. Then came a pattern, short pulse, pause, two long tones. Morse. The message repeated until he recognized part of it. Lyra. He turned the dial slowly. Project Lyra, he whispered, tasting the words. Brann lifted his head, ears twitching as if in recognition. On the next repeat, faint voices layered behind the buzz, distorted, genderless, fragments stitched through waves. Ventilation intact. Preserve. Error in sequence. Listen. Then only static. Reed grabbed his coat and the key. We're going back. The submarine awaited under half a fathom of still water. Hatch already dry to the touch, though the tide lapped around its hull. When he set the key near the seam, the door opened of its own accord. The interior glow returned, but softer, like the pulse of a sleeping creature. Inside, the air felt heavier, not stale, just aware. The hum had become delicate, almost musical. Reed moved toward the control room, passing the line of frozen crew in their glass pods. Condensation beaded along the inside of one panel, then cleared. The figure within, a young woman this time, had her eyes open. Reed froze mid-step. Those eyes weren't clouded. They reflected faint movement, tracking him as though through water. For a moment he doubted what he saw. Then one slow bubble escaped her parted lips, drifting upward to vanish against the glass. Brann whimpered low, retreating half a step, but not breaking. A small screen across the console blinked awake. Lines of text scrolled too fast to read, then stopped on a single phrase. Memory integrity 48%. Request auditory input. Reed hesitated. Auditory input, he repeated aloud. The submarine replied with a hollow chime that arranged itself into rhythm, 3 pulses mirroring his voice pattern. He understood then. It wanted sound. Not noise, but contact. He cleared his throat and spoke quietly, unsure what he was supposed to say. My name's Reed Maddox. I found you washed under the sand. What are you? The panels flickered, each pod responding with faint resonance. A tremor seeped through the deck, rippling under his boots. The words "return sequence" lit across one wall, then dissolved. He reached for the nearest terminal, brushing dust aside. A hatch beneath it clicked open, revealing a weatherproof notebook sealed in translucent film. He peeled it free and read the first line written in bold pencil. Project Lyra, Phase 3. Preservation through sonic continuum. The pages that followed were a hybrid of scientific notation and diary. Consciousness as vibration, soul as sustained frequency. When deep pressure ruptured hull integrity, transferred vocal imprints to resonance core. Crew remains to archive pattern until surface memories can retrieve. Reed swallowed hard. They recorded themselves into sound, he murmured. Brann gave a small, questioning bark, and the walls answered with 3 short tones in the exact same cadence. The dog's ears shot up. He barked again, slower, and the tone shifted to match his rhythm. The submarine was imitating him. You're responding to patterns, Reed said, voice steadying, awe mingling with apprehension. You hear through him, don't you? Across the room, one of the pods released a faint hiss. The condensation cleared completely from within, revealing the same young officer. Her hand twitched once, fingertips brushing the glass. Reed stepped closer, unable to look away. The hum surrounding them deepened, carrying gentle fluctuation like breathing. A whisper arose beside the glass, thin, layered, unmistakably human. "Are we home?" Reed's throat tightened. He whispered back instinctively, "Not yet." Light rippled through the corridor, expanding outward. More pods responded, each awakening in low transition tones, forming harmony that filled the space like a choral lament. It wasn't mechanical. It was grief, transposed into resonance. Brann pressed against Reed's leg, trembling yet refusing to leave. Flashes of images burst against the inner glass, memories playing as silhouettes. Men and women inside the vessel during its final descent, sealing valves, adjusting frequencies, faces illuminated by console light. The last entry from the notebook explained it. Catastrophic implosion deterrence attempted through harmonic field. Succeeded in preserving encoded personas. Vessel continues as archive of living sound. The pressure in Reed's ears built until words blurred with tone. Through it, he caught fragments. Hold sequence, maintain warmth, remember us when the sea is cold. He shut his eyes, forcing even breath. "You're still trapped," he said softly, waiting for someone to listen. The tones steadied, easing into lower resonance, acknowledging comprehension. Behind everything came faint, echoing thunder, not real. It came from within the hull, distant memory translating as storm. Outside, lightning ignited behind the small porthole. The sea beyond had turned from gray to green. Currents twisted against the surface, though no wind touched them. Brann barked once, sharp. The submarine seemed to answer, flooding the chamber with gold light for a heartbeat. Reed rifled through the remaining pages of the notebook. The last entry stood out, written in frantic scrawl. Final vessel integrity low. Transference incomplete. Command left to surface liaison Witt. Should he survive, instruct memory realignment through harmonic key. If the world has forgotten, remind the ocean what we gave it. He inhaled sharply. "Witt," he said aloud. "The old man from the market." The name at last had a place. As if hearing, the main console flickered. A dim figure appeared on screen, grainy but familiar. The old man's voice, time-warped and wavering. "If you've come this far, the key answered you. The ocean's losing warmth. We meant to give it back through sound. When you play the final sequence, energy will release, and we'll sleep. Don't be afraid of the light." The image faded. Outside, thunder rolled across a clear sky. Reed felt moisture gather in his eyes, though it wasn't sorrow alone. It was awe, the kind that follows understanding, too big for language. He looked down at his trembling hands. The key still glowed faintly. "You were one of them," he whispered to the remembered face on the screen. "And you left this to finish the song." Brann howled suddenly, not in fear but deep resonance, smooth and long like a note held by bow on string. The submarine responded instantly. Every wall vibrated, joining until the air seemed liquid. Sparks of light danced across the pods. Reed clasped the dog's collar, grounding himself. The voices joined once more, not distinct, but collective. Words threaded through vibration. "We heard you," the memory continues. Then the light subsided, descending to calm shimmer. Outside, the water glowed pale as milk. On its surface spiraled small eddies forming concentric rings around the hull. The storm had gathered far too quickly. Clouds rolled in from horizon to horizon, though moments ago the sky was bare. Reed pressed both hands to the console to steady himself. The hum aligned with his pulse again, equal measure of peace and danger. He knew something vast was preparing to move. The vessel's systems weren't simply awakening. They were remembering themselves back into function. He turned to Brann, voice barely audible over rising echo. "We'll have to finish what they started before the sea takes it again." The dog barked once in reply. Lights stuttered overhead, and for the briefest second, every pod exhaled vapor simultaneously, as if 15 lungs released the same breath. Reed swallowed the taste of salt, thick in the air. Beyond the portholes, waves formed where none should, each crest lit from below by threads of luminous energy. The storm wasn't above. It brewed in the depths. He gathered the journal and the key, tucking both into his jacket. "We hear you," he said once more to the silent room, a vow more than statement. At that, the hum settled into new rhythm, steady, assured, like the heartbeat of someone freed from a long vigil. But outside, thunder cracked hard, as if the ocean itself had shifted its weight, impatient for what came next. Wind screamed over the harbor that night, tearing at the roof shingles of Reed's boathouse, until each gust sounded like the sea trying to pry its way inside. Brann paced near the door, anxious, eyes catching streaks of lightning over the bay. Reed checked the voltmeter again, every needle pressed against maximum, though the generator wasn't running. The submarine's signal had grown constant, pulsing through shoreline power lines like a heartbeat amplified through metal. He knew it wouldn't stop unless he answered. The notebook lay open on the table, last line underlined twice. "Play the final sequence. The ocean will remember." He copied the coordinates into his old field transmitter, adjusting dials until the hum from outside synchronized with the machine's feedback. Each click of frequency alignment sent a tremor up his arms. Brann whimpered low, tail tucked. "It's all right," Reed murmured. "We'll listen first." He pressed the headset to his ear. At first, nothing but roaring static. Then, under it, faint tones, almost voices, rising and falling like distant singing trapped beneath an avalanche. Every shift in pitch triggered corresponding light from the hull outside, brightening the fog to pale gold. He switched on the recorder, not to broadcast yet, just to capture. The equipment vibrated violently, meters blurred. On impulse, he tapped his fingers against the table 3 times. The pattern echoed back through the headset a beat later, same rhythm, proving the frequency looped between him and whatever waited offshore. He realized then the submarine had turned the entire bay into a resonant chamber. The lights in the boathouse flickered. A memory surfaced, tropical bridge collapse, floodwaters spinning around trapped soldiers, the radio line filled only by their breathing before silence. Reed gritted his teeth, heart thudding in that same rhythm. Guilt and sound braided together until he couldn't tell which belonged to him. He whispered to the static, "I'm here." The pulse answered, longer, steadier. But tangled in its hum, he caught familiar fragments of human cadence. Release sequence. Error. Cannot surface. Dozens of voices, the preserved crew pleading through distortion. He turned up transmission power, the sound nearly tearing through the speakers. Rain lashed against the windows in sudden downpour. Brann barked sharply 3 times, exactly matching the Morse beat that had haunted them for weeks. The radio hiss settled to silence. Then, from the shoreline, a single resonant tone rolled through the night, low as thunder, but carried by water rather than sky. Reed grabbed his coat, shoved the key into his pocket, and ran. The path to the harbor was a gauntlet of wind-thrown sand and sea spray. Lightning sketched fragments of the old shipyard cranes as silhouettes swaying like giants. Below, the tide raged in unusual rhythm, retreating, then surging back with mathematical precision. The submarine's dorsal fin glowed cyan through the surf. Brann bounded beside him, soaked but undeterred. When they reached the beach, Reed could see arcs of electricity crawling over the hull, lines connecting vents to steel plates like a web of light. It wasn't random. It was Morse, repeating Lyra again and again. He climbed onto the slick surface using a rusted anchor chain, dogs scrambling after him. The hum grew so deep it seemed to bend his ribs inward. "All right," he said through gritted teeth, placing the portable transmitter against the hull. "Let's give you a voice again." He tuned the frequency down until it resonated with the ship's vibration. The air quivered. The static resolved into structured tone. The deck beneath him brightened, forming luminous rings expanding outward. Brann backed away, tail low but steady. From within the vessel came muffled response, alternating long and short pulses that spelled one word: ready. Reed steadied the mic. "Running acoustic test," he said, falling back into instinctive naval procedure. "Begin sequence." Instantly, memory assaulted him. The bridge collapse, water rushing in, the sound of twisted girders shrieking as they gave way. He saw the faces of those he couldn't save, their voices breaking into radio as bubbles and noise. The submarine wasn't showing him ghosts. It was mirroring his own frequencies, dredging trauma woven into his heartbeat. Every vibration through metal matched his pulse when fear nearly stopped it years ago. He stumbled, gripping the railing. Brann nudged his leg, barking once more. The rhythm aligned, 3 short bursts, 1 long howl. The tones steadied. Around them, storm clouds split open, releasing rain that hissed on the electrified surface but didn't spark, absorbed instead, as though the vessel drank the water to fuel its resonance. The submerged lights turned violet, then deep amber. Reed realized it was sinking to emotional intensity. His fear made it waver, his courage steadied the hue. "You need balance," he muttered. "Not command, resonance." He inhaled sharply, closed his eyes, and matched his breathing to the pulse. Inside the hull, faint silhouettes began to glow, the preserved crew shifting within their pods. Voices combined into harmonic waveforms, echoing through the storm. The sound no longer felt external, it rose within his chest. For a terrifying second, he thought his heart had stopped, replaced by theirs. He pressed the key to the panel seam. The pattern of circles along its handle illuminated, spinning slowly. "To release you," he said, shouting over the roar, "we broadcast the sequence. You'll return yourself to the current." A crack stuttered across the sky. The submarine heaved once against the sand like something alive trying to breathe again. Water surged around them, but Reed refused to move. He flipped the transmitter to broadcast. Final signal. Transmit harmonic field. From the speakers erupted a single tone, melancholy, wide, endless. It rolled across the bay in concentric waves that bent the falling rain into shimmering arcs. The sound wasn't pure. It carried hundreds of underlying voices, each releasing a sigh that turned into music. Buildings along the shore flickered, their glass rattled in sympathetic vibration. Seabirds burst from the cliffs, crying as if in accompaniment. The lighthouse beam fractured into prismatic light where it met the airborne mist. Brann stood rigid but quiet, chest rising in time with the resonance. Then came stillness. The tone decayed to subsonic hum, felt more than heard. Reed realized tears mingled with the salt spray on his face. He couldn't tell if they were his or remembered by the sea. Gradually, the storm settled. Clouds peeled apart, revealing slivers of stars trembling behind them. The submarine lay motionless, half-buried, light draining from its seams. Steam lifted from vents in slow, ghostly threads. The air smelled clean, almost sweet. Reed knelt, hand against the hull. It was warm, not mechanical heat, but living warmth, the kind rising from another's skin. The dog pressed close, resting his head on Reed's knee. In the lull, he heard final traces of that great cord fading through water, spreading outward to open sea. A whisper folded inside it, gentle, grateful. Thank you for reminder. He sat back on the hull, exhausted beyond thought. You're welcome, he said softly, voice trembling. Rest easy. The key in his palm cooled, then softened, until its metal ran like wax and fused into the submarine's skin, leaving only a faint mark shaped like an infinity loop. Brann wagged his tail once, slow and sure. Dawn approached behind bruised clouds, the horizon lifting from black to silver. Warm light lapped against the shore as if new tide carried glow in its veins. Reed stood unsteadily, staring at how the waves curved around the submarine's outline, no longer resisting it, but embracing it like coastline reclaiming lost kin. Somewhere deeper below, echoes of that broadcast continued, translating through pressure and current. He could feel it vibrating the soles of his boots, a low heartbeat traveling outward toward darkness, awakening something vast and benevolent beneath the waterline. Brann nudged his hand. Reed smiled weakly, running fingers through the dog's wet fur. They're home, he whispered. Behind them the sea shimmered, no longer cold gray but tinted faint gold as sunlight broke through mist. For the first time in years he felt heat against his shoulders that wasn't born of fire or machinery. It came from below, the ocean breathing warmth again. He turned toward the horizon, where faint aftertones rippled like the memory of a hymn. Guess you were right, Wit, he murmured. When the ocean forgets, someone has to remind it. Brann barked softly, affirming agreement. Together they watched as day gathered strength, indifferent yet transformed. The gentle hum beneath the waves settling into rhythm with the returning tide. The night after the broadcast, the bay held an impossible calm. No wind, no ripple, not even the gulls broke the horizon. Reed Maddox sat on the sand with Brann pressed close against his leg. The submarine shimmered faintly under the tide, half buried again, yet still alive with undertone. Each pulse rose through the water and into the air like a heartbeat translated through stone. He had dreamed this sound for years without knowing its name. Now, hearing it outside of his skull, he realized how quiet the world had been before. He thought it was finished. But when the dog stirred at midnight, growling low, Reed saw light spreading beneath the water, slow, deliberate spirals curling outward from the vessel's fuselage. The sand vibrated beneath them. "Not done yet," Reed murmured. He gathered the lantern and began walking toward the receding tide. The key was gone, fused into metal, but warmth from that mark still throbbed through his palm. Brann followed, tail low, steps quiet in the shallow surf. The hatch opened without his touch. The water inside drained itself as if the sea bowed out of their way. The green glow within was brighter now, climbing the walls like ivy made of phosphor. He descended the ladder again, one careful step at a time, his breath fogging the air, though the temperature had risen. The corridors looked different. Where before the panels had hummed faint blue, they now pulsed with colors that moved like constellations, clusters of golden dots forming, dissolving, and reforming into patterns across the ceilings. The hum kept its rhythm, steady but layered with new notes, richer than before. Brann walked ahead, nose to the deck, tail sweeping slow arcs of reflection. They reached the chamber of the pods, yet none glowed. The glass had gone clear. The preservative liquid within each capsule was gone too. On the floor, faint trails of moisture curved from each toward the reactor corridor. It looked like the exodus of light itself. Reed hesitated only a beat, then followed where they led. The deeper he went, the louder the harmonies grew, folding into something almost familiar, tones of human breath inside metallic cavern. Beyond the final bulkhead lay the chamber he had glimpsed once before, but never fully entered. Now it opened wide, transformed. He stopped short. The space no longer obeyed sense of scale. Columns curved upward into darkness, dripping soft radiance. The walls pulsed with pale veins, and at their center hung a sphere twice the size of a man, suspended over a shallow pool that shimmered like liquid glass. Inside the sphere rippled light in rhythmic compression, expansion, and release, mimicking a heartbeat. Reed exhaled slowly. "So this is the heart." Brann whined softly, leaning against his knee. Reed stepped forward until his reflection merged with the moving glow. The warmth emanating from the sphere brushed his skin in pulses that alternated with his blood's own cadence until the two synced, indistinguishable. "Project Lyra," he whispered, remembering the phrase from the journal. "Sound preserves life." He realized then that every note emitted through the vessel came from here, the stored voices, the crew, the resonance built to outlast decay. The old man Wit must have carried enough of the core's frequency in his own body to keep it linked on the surface all these years. Within the ball of light, shapes stirred, faint silhouettes merging and separating like cells in creation. Their movement formed loops, each collapsing into a brighter flare. As Reed watched, one outline steadied and took the form of the old man's face, younger but unmistakable. The voice arrived not as sound but vibration through the air. "You answered." Reed's eyes burned. "You left me the key." Someone had to remember what warmth meant. The figure drifted closer within the sphere, expression calm. "We are echoes, Reed." The vessel held what bodies couldn't, but memory needs a listener to stay alive. You listened. His mind spun with questions, but the weight of that single statement silenced them. Around the core shimmered faint threads linking to each empty pod, feeding light backward through corridors like veins to a sleeping body. "What happens now?" he asked. "Release," the voice said simply. "One final harmonization, then we return the warmth to sea. The current knows where to carry it." Reed glanced down at Brann. The dog stood steady now, gaze fixed on the glowing sphere, ears relaxed. The rhythm of his breath matched the pulses. Then let's finish it. The surface beneath Reed's feet opened in a slow spiral. Not collapse, but invitation. The sphere lowered until its base brushed the pool. Energy rose through the water, playing luminous patterns around the edges like tidal light under full moon. He could feel every vibration passing through his shoes straight into bone. Instinct guided him. He held out his hand. The mark where the key had melted into his skin flared softly. That warmth leaped toward the sphere in a clean arc. At contact, light surged, filling the chamber with radiance bright enough to erase distinction between matter and sound. For a heartbeat, he saw everything. The deep ocean folding above them, the memory of the crew streaming outward as ribbons of color, each thread climbing toward open sea. He saw the old man standing on the wharf years ago, younger again, smiling with the quiet satisfaction of one promise kept. And he saw Brann beside him, not barking, simply watching with that unshakable trust only a creature without words could hold. The sound increased until it became silence too full to hear. Reed dropped to one knee, hand still against the core, the dog pressing close, grounding him as warmth turned searing. For a moment he feared heat would burn them out of existence. Then, pressure inverted, the warmth expanded outward, flowing through rather than into him. It felt like standing inside the first moment of sunrise. When the glare eased, the sphere was gone. In its place hovered faint mist, golden and electric. One by one, constellations on the walls dimmed, their energy bleeding gently toward exits leading to the sea. It wasn't destruction, it was dispersal. The hum softened to a gentle rhythm. Slow inhale, slower exhale. The ship relaxed. Reed steadied himself against the console, breathing hard, tears cutting tracks through the salt on his face. Brann licked his wrist once, tail thumping softly. He looked around the chamber, voice barely above whisper. "Are you free now?" A final tone replied, softer than breath. "We are home." Then it faded into the water below. Reed lingered, letting his heartbeat find its own rhythm again. The panels darkened until only dim green bioluminescence remained. He turned toward the ladder. With each step upward, the air cooled, fresh, carrying notes of salt and sun. When he pushed open the hatch, dawn had broken. The submarine lay grounded higher on shore than before, hull gleaming with soft copper hues. From vents along its side rose plumes of steam, warm and gentle. The tide lapped quietly around it, no longer hostile. The sea now moved with the vessel's pulse instead of against it. He climbed out and collapsed to sit on the sand, the dog leaning against him. The chill morning wind mingled with new warmth rising from the submarine's structure, creating unseasonal calm. For the first time in years, Reed's hands didn't shake. The echoes in his chest had faded from noise to harmony. Somewhere beyond the surf, sunlight struck the water, and for seconds, the entire bay glowed amber, waves threading gold like veins of a living thing. Reed smiled without realizing it. "Guess that's your heartbeat now," he murmured to the vessel. Brann barked once, tail sweeping the sand in slow rhythm. Beneath that hum of restored sea life, the lingering resonance of Project Lyra carried outward, through current, through tide, through time, teaching the ocean to remember warmth again. Morning came, thin and glimmering, the kind of light that doesn't so much rise as remember how to return. Reed Maddox lay half buried in wet sand, his head pillowed against Brann's flank. The rhythm under him was steady and strange, not just his own breath or the dog's heart, but something beneath them both. The submarine, resting at last. When he pushed upright, his body ached with a deep, satisfied fatigue. The sea before him shimmered as though threaded with fine metallic dust. The water itself seemed brighter, pulsing faint color that shifted with the tide. Just beyond the sandbar, the submarine's hull protruded from surf and foam. Half its body was still submerged, half bathed in sun. Steam rose in soft curls through vents on the dorsal fin, carrying warmth that felt impossible for early morning air. Brann dragged himself up, shook twice, and padded closer to the edge of the water. Reed followed. Together they stood where the waves met the shore. The breeze carried no hint of decay now, only faint salt sweetness. Gulls circled overhead, their calls breaking into rhythmic echoes of the hum still rolling through the bay. Reed touched the side of the vessel. The steel no longer felt like steel at all. It was warm, faintly spongy beneath the surface, breathing through tiny pores that shimmered in sunlight. "Alive," he said quietly. The word didn't feel foolish anymore. The dog pressed his nose against the metal, sighed, then looked up at his owner with calm eyes. Across the horizon, small fishing boats were already emerging, drawn by the glow. Reed's first instinct was to wave them off, hide what he'd found. But part of him knew this sight was meant to be witnessed. The old man's final instruction echoed within him. Don't be afraid of the light. By midday, the entire cove had changed. Warm currents flowed where icy depths once ruled. Jane's Rock, a mile east, simmered with condensation. Even plankton at the surface shimmered gold. Reed noticed schools of fish returning, silver flash on silver flash, species he hadn't seen in the bay since boyhood. The hum from the submarine matched each pulse of the tide, as though it governed the tempo of life itself. He spent hours walking the shore, watching heat shimmer off wet stones. Every so often, the vessel exhaled a thin breath of steam through vents, and each time it did, the air grew a degree warmer. The world didn't burn. It breathed. Toward afternoon, locals began to arrive. Sailors, dockhands, weather-beaten old women with scarves knotted around their heads. They stood at a distance, murmuring. Some made the sign of the cross. One man asked if Reed had seen lightning strike the sea in the night. Reed only said, "Something under it woke up." None pressed him further. Brann stayed uneasy until the first gull landed atop the conning tower. When it didn't flee or ignite, the tension eased from the dog's stance. A second bird joined, then a dozen more, perched content in the artificial warmth. It was as if life itself recognized the vessel as kin. By evening, the cold currents had reversed so completely that mist began to bloom upward from the shore. Within hours, blades of seagrass emerged green again, where frost had clung for decades. Reed crouched, rubbing wet earth between his palms. It smelled alive, iron mixed with sweetness. He looked back toward the beached submarine. Sunlight caught its new markings, faint filigree trailing from the key's melted impression across its hull. The shape resembled a spiral intersected by an infinity loop, a symbol that seemed half mathematical, half biological. When he pressed his palm against it, the heat beneath the surface matched the rhythm of his pulse precisely once, then settled to the tide's slow throb. The machine knew he was there and no longer needed him. "Guess it's yours now," he said to the sea. That night, under clear starlight, Reed sat on his weathered dock, writing in his logbook. The pages smelled of salt and cedar smoke. Brann slept near the stove, paws twitching as if running through warmer dreams. Reed wrote slowly, every word measured. "We thought we were keeping ghosts," he wrote, "but they were keeping us." Project Lyra succeeded not in saving a crew, but in teaching the ocean how to remember life's heat. He paused, listening. Outside, faint music drifted through open windows, the same harmonic undertone, now subdued, woven into the surf itself. You could almost believe it was the sound of a planet healing a wound too old for memory. By dawn the next day, rumors spread through nearby villages that the frost lines along the coast had vanished overnight. Fishermen reported nets heavy with species unseen for generations. A marine scientist who visited the cove measured water temperature 10 degrees above previous records and couldn't explain how. Reed said nothing. He only helped her test the current once, then smiled when she found no mechanical heat source. Maybe the ocean just decided to be kind again, he told her. Weeks passed. The submarine remained half buried but peaceful. No one dared tow or probe it. It became part of the harbor, a silent benefactor, humming just below audibility, keeping the water mild even as winter pressed inland. Reed repaired boats as he always had, though for the first time, customers lingered after paying, drawn by the warmth that clung to the place. He and Brann resumed their morning walks along the dunes. The dog had changed. The stiffness in his joints had eased. His coat gleamed even under weak sunlight. Reed liked to think the warmth was doing more than reviving coral. It was curing time itself in small mercies. Sometimes he would stand at the edge of the pier at night, watching the vessel's outline beneath the rippled moonlight. Every crest of wave struck its hull and came away glowing faint amber. He could feel through the soles of his boots that the hum had never stopped. It had simply learned to breathe quieter, like an old soul at peace. He found himself talking aloud to the sea, mostly gratitude, sometimes confession. "You held on to them longer than any war ever could," he'd say. "Guess we both needed reminding what purpose feels like." Brann always seemed to understand, resting his muzzle on Reed's knee until the silence filled again with gentle resonance. One dusk, as violet divided the horizon, Reed saw a pod of dolphins leaping in synchronized arcs across the mouth of the bay. They hadn't appeared there in decades. Each time their bodies struck the water, a new set of ripples extended outward, catching sun like gold dust. For the first time in years, he laughed out loud. Later that night, he placed his finished entry atop the bookshelf beside a single object preserved in glass. A fragment of the melted key he'd found near the hatch days after the event. It had cooled into transparent resin, inside which lay a small bubble of sea air, pulsing faintly with light. He didn't know if it was imagination or the last echo of Lyra, but he liked to think the sea left him a heartbeat to keep. The wind outside was gentle. Through open windows drifted the low harmony of waves meeting shore. Brann lifted his head, listening, then let out one soft bark as if in answer. Reed smiled, whispered, "Some machines remember kindness better than men ever could." He closed the journal, laid a hand on the dog's fur, and leaned back in his chair. The glow from the harbor windows flickered once, calm as breathing. Out beyond, the submarine shone faintly under the twilight waves, its pulse joined in permanent rhythm with the living sea. Weeks folded into gentle seasons. The bay no longer groaned under storms, but breathed a steady warmth that carried through every ripple. People said the water sang at night. Reed never argued. He'd walk the shoreline with Brann keeping pace, each step mirrored by soft hum from beneath the tide. The submarine glowed faintly when moonlight struck it, the pulse matching the slow heartbeat that had become part of the coast's rhythm. At his desk, Reed opened his journal again and wrote a single line. We thought we were keeping ghosts, but they were keeping us. He closed the book, feeling peace settle like sunlight through water. Brann lifted his head, ears twitching toward the waves. Together they stepped outside, the air mild, horizon silvered by dusk. Out on the sand, the tide whispered against the vessel's flank. Whisper meeting whisper. Reed smiled. Some machines remember kindness better than men ever could. If this story moved you, share it with someone who's ever felt adrift. Let the reminder travel farther than sound or sea. And subscribe for more strange, human stories, tales that prove something still listens in the dark, waiting patiently to be heard again.